What happens if we don't have a vision for our lives?
I think you have less direction. And so you make less progress because you can't make progress unless you have direction, because otherwise you're just moving. Mm-hmm. So like you can only have direct, like a vector, right? Movement in a direction if you know where you're trying to go. And so it's like the first thing we have to do is figure out where we're trying to walk, and then we can start walking there.
Yes. You said you want to be a billionaire in 5 to 7 years, so you kind of see the math playing out that way.
Yeah.
Let's say you were forced to do it in half the time.
Yeah.
3 years, you were forced to be a billionaire.
Yeah.
Or some catastrophic event would happen.
Yeah.
What would it take from you to reach the $1 billion goal in half the time? What would you need to do differently? And how would you need to think and act differently?
I would probably onboard more operators faster. That being said, the current plan gets us there in like 3 years. I say 5 to 7 publicly because I want to give myself a little buffer. I tend to be that way because like I have probably a little bit different approach with goals. Like I want to hit every goal. Like I don't like missing goals. And so for me, I don't like teaching myself or teaching other people that if I say something's going to happen, it doesn't happen. Because some people are like, shoot for the moon, think really, like I think you absolutely should think really big. But then like, okay, how do I make a goal that like, and then once I have that goal, do the activities that make it unreasonable not to hit it. Like if I had to hit this goal, to your point, what level of activity would I have to do that it would be unreasonable? It would be unacceptable based on how I see reality that I would not achieve it. If you're like, I want to learn sales, I would say it's unreasonable that if you get on 10,000 sales calls, you will not be good at sales. It'd be unreasonable. Okay, how long will it take me to get on 10,000 sales calls? Right?
A lot of time.
Yeah, a couple of years, right? A couple of years you could do it. Okay. So then that's a goal. You know what I mean? Like, and I can set that, and if I do the activities, it would be unreasonable that I'm not. Now, realistically, you probably get there in half the time, right? Because you're probably pretty good at sales even after your first 2,000-3,000 calls, right? You're probably pretty good. And so with this, we would, what we're doing now is the only thing I could probably do is take on bigger companies. That would be the shortest path. But I feel confidently, like in terms of how much we're stretching, I feel good about it. Like I would feel like I'd be taking on more risk to hit that, if that makes sense.
If you had to do it
in
half the time with less risk.
Yeah, with less risk.
What would you need to do?
That's a good question.
What would need to happen? What would need to shift inside of you?
Yeah, I would need more people faster. I mean, it would just be...
How many people would you need?
I would spend more aggressively on talent acquisition. So I would basically go into, like, from the debt perspective, right? So rather than think of the businesses or like the portfolio companies as cash flowing towards me, I would probably take all of the excess that is there and plow it into talent earlier. So right now I live on a certain amount of cash flow, et cetera, from, just from the portfolio companies. And I probably have gotten accustomed to that, and so I don't like cutting below that. So if I had to, then I would say all of that money, rather than going to Alex, is going to go into more talent, bigger, faster. Yeah, exactly. And then they would amplify, and then we would increase our rate.
You would have less money in the short term over a couple of years, but then you would have way more money in the long term.
Totally.
So it's a comfort level.
Yeah, it is. No, as we're talking about it.
Yeah, you knowing that you like to have a certain amount of cash flow every month.
Yeah.
But you've got a bunch of cash in the bank too.
I know. It's 100% illogical.
If you had to do it though, let's say you had to do it in 2.5 years.
Say if we had to do it tomorrow.
If you had to do it in 2.5 years, because you need time too.
Yeah.
5 to 7, you had to do it in 2.5.
Yeah.
And you had to stretch and get extremely uncomfortable, where you're not going broke. Obviously, you got money.
Yeah.
How many people would you need to hire?
Yeah.
And how much less cash flow would you need to have?
I mean, I would eliminate my cash flow.
All your cash.
Yeah, I mean, if I was really going, I was going ham on it, I would have no cash flow to me. I mean, I don't need.
You have money though.
Yeah, I have money. Right. Yeah. So I would eliminate all the cash flow to me, and it would 100% of the money would go into the team. The only thing that would go faster than that is that I drain my own net worth to further
fund.
Yeah, exactly. I would be incurring financial debt to more quickly build the enterprise value of the asset. So I'd be transferring money into the asset fast. It's like you incur different types of debt. Like if you incur no debt when you start a business, you do always incur debt. You incur management debt, you incur technical debt.
Time debt.
100%. And so people, like, all businesses start with debt. It just depends on what type of debt you're dealing with, right? And so if you don't have money, then that's fine. You just incur other debt. Like even when we think about how we're building the holdco right now at acquisition.com, like I am building more fixed cost in the infrastructure right now because of what I want it to be in a year, 2 years.
Yes.
And so if I wanted to run it, like we already do reinvest, obviously a big percentage, but I would just reinvest more
Into
and
team.
be okay with it. Yeah,
Into
I've just grown accustomed to this. And it was funny because a buddy of mine I had dinner with last night sold his company for $250 million. And we were talking about how cash flow is a very regular reinforcer from a behavioral standpoint. Like you get this feedback directly every month of how you're doing, right? And so you, as entrepreneurs, or at least for me, I've been always a high cash flow entrepreneur. Like I've never been like a reinvest every dollar into the business. I like making money from my businesses. But that has become a trait that I have learned to look at as my barometer every month. Like, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? And so it would have to, so to the question of like, what would have to change in me? I would have to change how I measure success, and then I'd have to reinforce the behavior in a different way. I'd have to measure it differently.
Right. And so is the cash flow coming from all the businesses you guys are in partnership with?
Yeah.
You get a percentage of cash flow, they get a percentage, the business owner as well? And so you have a certain amount of cash flow every month that's coming in from all these businesses, right?
Yeah.
But you also have a ton of money in the bank.
Yeah.
So one of them you could
I could
take some money out somewhere. You can still keep the cash flow coming and take the money from the savings.
I'm so security driven. It's funny because I was having this conversation with this guy, and so the guy sold his company for $250 million. For the last 10 years, he's lived on $70,000 a year. $70,000 a year. And so he was staying at the Marriott, and I was staying at a nicer hotel. And I was like, dude.
You got money now, yeah.
You got money now. And he's like, I know. It's like, but I just.
Isn't that funny?
Totally.
For years, I would sit middle seat, back of the airplane, cheapest flights for years.
Yeah.
Even when I had
Yeah.
7 figures and a year coming in.
Yeah.
But because I was so used to, I was like, I don't want to lose my money.
Totally.
It's like, I want to make sure that I can live like this.
Yeah.
I was still sleeping on friends' couches.
Yeah.
When I traveled to events, it was like any way to save money. And it's not until the last couple of years was like, okay, my back hurts. I need to like have some like leg room, right? I'm a big guy. But for years, it was just like, how do I save and use that money to reinvest in going to the event, buying the ticket to the conference, or investing in coaching that will accelerate the revenue long term.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because I think, and this is just off the cuff here, but many of the people that I know who have tremendous amounts of money have huge fears around being poor. And so it's just as an interesting thought, like a lot of people who don't have money see people who have money as thinking differently, and they might in that they are more uncomfortable being poor than you are. Like it is more painful for them than it is for you. It might be. I'm just being really real.
It might be why some of them are stingy too with their money.
Of course,
They're like,
100%.
I'm not going to spend this $5. I'm going to keep it. They're very stingy with all of it.
2 nights ago, we were out to dinner with a guy who just got valued at $1 billion, right? And it's all cash flow. It's not one of these software things. Like it's off. Like he's getting, like he's making real money, crazy money. And he's like, I'm not going to that gym. He's like, for Equinox, I said, I'm not paying $200 a month for a gym membership. It's a different perspective. Now, I'm not saying I'm that way. You know what I mean? Like I'm okay spending on gym membership. Like that's fine for me. But like everyone has their own things, and like there are these behaviors. Like he got the other guy who had the 250. He got to that point because he squeezed everything out of his business, which made the business so valuable, and then he was able to sell it. But like the $1 billion guy was saying, he's like, you know what they don't tell you about when you sell your business, because he's sitting next to the guy with the 250, right? And he's like, the moment you sell your business, he's like, you have no cash flow. And so he felt that too. He's like, what are you going to do? He's like, you're going to take the money, and then what are you going to do? You're going to try and buy more cash flow because you got to replace the cash flow you have with the business.
You got to
He's
get
like,
real estate assets. You got to do something
He's like,
else.
why bother? He's like, I'll just keep it. And so he doesn't have any intention of selling. And so it was an interesting lesson for me too, because like we obviously got rid of our cash flow asset when we sold all 3 last year.
You got a lot more money, but you don't have the money cash coming in.
Right, because then it looks like this finite asset. The business goes on forever, in your mind at least, right? And so it gives you this illusion of control, this illusion of security. And me personally, most people wouldn't believe this when I hear it, but like I'm very risk averse. And so I probably need, like, what's the core changes that I need to have? I probably need to be a little bit more of a risk taker than I am. Like I tend to always take the lowest risk path when I can. Even the idea of like when I quit entrepreneurship, when I quit my job to start entrepreneurship, it was because I knew that the path that I was on was guaranteed not to get to me where I want. So I had a 0 outcome. And so this one, even though it was lower, like I had a low chance of success, the other one had 100% failure guarantee. And so it felt like the lower risk option for my long-term goals to quit my job and become an entrepreneur for that reason. And,
Right.
and so, people are like, I'm really risk averse. I'm like, so am I. Like, I hoard money. Like, I do.
You haven't
I
spent
do.
any of the money from the exit still.
No,
It's
not
like
at
just
all.
sitting in the bank.
Nothing.
Yeah.
We started working the next day. We didn't even take a day off.
Yeah.
We literally sold, wire hit, and we started working on acquisition.com the next day.
Let's say you had to start putting that cash flow every month into other things, team, resources, whatever it is, and that wasn't coming in, and maybe let's call it $100,000 a month was coming in cash flow. I don't know how much it is, but let's just say that is going into hiring team and other things to support you getting to the billion in 2.5 years. What would need to shift inside of you after 3 months of feeling no cash flow come in to stack your bank account in order for you to be okay with it to get to that billion quicker?
I would just have to be more secure, just realistically. Like I use.
What does that mean? Is that an internal?
I use cash flow from businesses as evidence to the fact that I'm not a failure. And so I've always, it has been easier for me to change my conditions than to change who I am. And so I have used my material success and accolades to quiet the voices of not being good enough. And so for that, me having that, if I have that little voice that peeps up, it's like, hey, look at that. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm okay. I'm not that bad.
This money just came in every month.
No, I'm not that bad,
yeah.
right? And so I'd really have to re-engineer the conversation I have with myself around how I value myself. Because then people are like, well, if everything disappeared, how would you feel about yourself? I like to think that I would be uncomfortable and that I would change my views, but I haven't needed to do that yet, and so my effort goes elsewhere.
Right.
But that's what probably would have to happen in order for me to make that change.